Hey, welcome to Keeping It Young podcast, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I'm Dave.
And I'm Bethlie.
Thanks for joining us today. Hey, everybody, we are right here in the middle of a series about just training our children in the different seasons of life and some practical advice and encouragement. I hope you all agree with us that it just is important.
It is. It doesn't matter really what, I don't know if you want to say philosophy of parenting you have, probably somewhere in that philosophy is going to take some training of your children. I think most of you would agree that you don't just leave a child on their own.
Yeah, and the Bible says that a child left to himself brings shame to his mother.
Yes.
And how true that is. We've seen that evidenced over and over and over again. And one of the huge issues of our day is an absentee parent, usually a daddy.
Yeah.
But one of the things our culture continues to point towards is the dad is absent and the damage that does to the training of the child.
Yes.
And so it's just very important. I know we talked about pitfalls last week, and these are very important. And we kind of finished that one up, but we need to really examine our lives and make sure we're being very careful about those pitfalls.
Right.
And I did think of one more that, we were running out of time there last week, but I think sometimes that one of the pitfalls that is so easy for us to embrace is this idea that my special case makes a difference. Meaning that, people can often, excuse their failure to train or where their child is, and they base it on special cases. And it may be something as simple as, my kid's dad is gone.
Right.
Or, I'm a single parent. Or it might be even, a diagnosis. Well, my kid has ADHD, or my kid has ADD, or my kid is autistic, or my kid's on the spectrum is another way folks say those things.
Yes.
All of those things are very possible.
Yes.
But none of those things give us the right to excuse training.
Right.
In other words, if you've got a child, let's say you got a child and you're convinced or even have been told, my child has ADHD, okay? Don't let that be the identification of your child's life. You're the mom or dad, and no matter whether your child is autistic, whether your child is on the spectrum, whether your child has ADHD, none of that, whether you're a single parent, whether, you've got, a ton of kids or just one kid, don't let any special case scenario keep you from embracing the role you have of training children. So I think that's a huge pitfall.
It is.
The idea that our special case exempts us from training.
Right. It may prove to be a little more challenging, although if you have multiple children, if you have children that aren't diagnosed with whatever one of your children is diagnosed with, you're going to know that all parenting is challenging. So it may have its own challenges, but we have met many, many parents who successfully train children who have a special diagnosis or a special challenge in their life. Absolutely.
And, if your child does have ADHD, you really do want to train them well.
Yes.
It's going to take a little more effort, a little more work. You're going to have to be very aware of how to train them in that regards.
Right.
But you don't just throw up your hands and say, well, that's just how they are. It's ADHD.
Right.
Because if you do that, mom and dad, if the Bible is very clear, if we leave the child to himself, he will bring shame. He will not, she will not learn. And if your child is autistic, obviously you're dealing in a whole different level, a different, behavior patterns and things. But every child has to be lovingly, firmly, gently, repetitively trained.
Consistently, faithfully.
And so that's one huge pitfall that we wanted to add. And before we jump in today. So the next step in this is we've been thinking about, just about talking, training, teaching our children and raising our children. Let's talk about some, questions that will help us to evaluate a little bit.
Okay.
And so we came up with a few here, questions to consider. And actually 3, we might think of others as we go along, but we came up with 3 here. What's the first one there?
Would I want my child to always behave this way?
That's an interesting question because in the first place, I guess no child would always behave that way.
Right.
Right. Because even a child that, as we would say, well, that is one bad, bratty kid, can still sometimes surprise you and be a very happy, sweet kid.
True.
But we have to look at behavioral situations. We have to look at where they are. And instead of ignoring things, instead of excusing things, instead of, laughing about it or looking away, we have to be willing to think to ourselves, is this where God, if my child behaves this way, the rest of their lives, am I okay with that?
Right.
And so it's a good question to evaluate. Look at your children and think, am I okay with this? Is this okay? Should we change that? Should we pick it up?
Right. And a
This is
lot of those
important.
things may be biblically based, obedience, lying, stealing, things like that, being unkind to other people. Those are all biblically based things that we should look at and say, you know what, I don't want my child to be this way for the rest of their life. And so these are things we're going to train. And then there will be practical things that you just are just practical for your lifestyle, for your schedule, for your home life. You just want to train them in a certain way.
Yep.
So there are things that I've seen, mamas just, oh my goodness, my child takes a pacifier, and when they turn 1 year old, we're going to get rid of the pacifier, and they go to town working on that. And then they don't take the time to train things that are important, like obedience, or they're not training their child to be kind. And they do make excuses. Well, they're just 1 year old, or they don't know any better yet, or, well, she doesn't have any siblings yet, so she doesn't have to learn how to be kind to other people, But then they will talk at length at how they trained her not to take a pacifier forever. So you just have to evaluate what are some things that are important and what are those things that you want to accomplish in their life.
Yeah. And be continually a student of that. Be continually thinking, where does my kid need to be? Where am I needing to help? Where am I needing to be training? So what a good question there to evaluate and to consider. What's the second question?
Would I want my child to react this way when he or she is older?
So it's a very similar one.
But very
it's
different.
a different. So behavior is, self-control, self-denial, but reaction can sometimes be based on our child's personality. And a child who is a little more energetic may, react with more anger or disgust. One child may react with more, I'm not speaking to you because, and we can excuse this in our culture, well, she's introverted, or my child is really shy.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, we cannot make excuses for our child's reactions. We have to train our children's reactions.
Right.
And even a child who is shy has to learn to live in a normal world where they speak when spoken to, where they respond, they react to things the correct way.
Yes.
And so what a powerfully good question there, I think.
Absolutely.
And how would you add to that? Anything at all?
Well, I would say sometimes we put up with, as parents, we can put up with a lot of whining. Children are like, I don't want to, and I don't, and there are times where our children are significantly tired. They're significantly out of schedule. They are hungry. And so even then though, you can have a training time of saying, Mama knows that you are really tired, and I know that you are really hungry, and we're going to take care of that as soon as we can. But what I need you to do is to not whine. We're going to be kind, and we're not going to use that tone of voice. And you just do need to be training, because we do have a young adult culture in America. And I don't want to be unkind here, but we do have a young adult culture that can be whiners. And so look at your child and think, okay, do I want my 4-year-old when he is 24 to still be like, I don't want to do that? Or do you want him to, by the time he is 24 years old, to know how to, as we say, man up? And okay, this is a hard situation, but I'm going to do it. And so these are all situations. I think sometimes we do, as parents, we just look at the here and now, and the immediate is so grabbing our attention that we forget that this child is not going to be 4 forever. They're someday going to be 10, and then 14, and then 24. And so your training is important.
Absolutely. And what a good point there, and what a good illustration. Because all of us have to be aware of that, don't we? And think that through and be alert to all of that.
Yes.
Because our children are going somewhere, and they're going based on where we train them. So really, really, really good thoughts there. There's another question here that we jotted down that will take us a little bit of time to talk. By the way, before we leave that, let's just return to that idea just a moment about, being a whiny generation. And if you think about that in light of our previous generations, one of the things people say is, man, adulting is so hard. It's just so hard. And I guess in a sense that's true, but really our adulting is easy compared to previous generations.
Oh my goodness, yes.
It's not very long ago at all that people would have to milk cows every morning, every night, 7 days a week, and even on holidays.
Right, and grow their own food.
Yes.
And although there are a lot of young adults who are going back to that, you can see it on Instagram where people are like, okay, we're moving out to the country and we're going to grow our own food and make our own bread. By and large, we don't know what that's like.
Yeah. So here's just some good questions to consider. And that's a good thing to think through. Would I want my child to always behave this way? Number 2, would I want my child to react this way when he or she is older? How about number 3? What is that one?
What definite steps am I taking to train my children in the way they should go?
Well, that's just a good question.
So just basically speaking, what am I doing to train my child?
Yeah, that is a question you need to ask yourself. What am I doing to train my child to have the right appetite, to be the right kind of adult, to be successful, to be happy, to be obedient? What am I doing? And it's very important to answer that question. All of you parents out there, if you got teenagers, what are you doing? If you have tweenies, what are you doing to train?
Yes.
If you have a toddler, what are you doing? If you have maybe a young elementary, kindergartner, what are you doing? What are you doing? So what a way to evaluate. And don't, and a couple of pieces of advice about that. Don't discredit the tried and true.
What do you mean by that?
Meaning that in the sense of the scriptures, the Bible reminds us over and over again, in a multitude of counselors, there are safety. A counselor is a person who knows more than we know. A counselor is a person who has more experience than we have. A counselor is a person that we can look to say, they have been through this and handled it in a right way and can give me wisdom about this.
Right.
So the Bible emphasizes older women to teach younger, older men to impact younger men. Those things are tried and true. And because we live in the social media age, it's so easy to embrace the new and novel rather than the tried and true.
Right.
Right. And so by tried and true, what I mean is look back through history. How did parents, by and large, a higher percentage of parents in years gone by have children who were obedient, who were happy, who were hardworking, who were respectful, who were pleasant to be around, who were enjoyable to be around? How did that happen? That's what I mean by tried and true. What has worked? And, the as far as cultural goes and all the, I guess sociological issues, was Freud that came along and basically said, the way we've done it for 6,000 years is wrong, and let's change it. And what we can look at right now is we can look around and go, okay, how'd that work out? And the answer is it didn't work out well at all.
Right.
So you younger parents that, you're on social media a lot. Social media is kind of, a place you go to. There was a time when we went to books. We would go to the library and look up books on subjects.
Right.
Then we started going to the internet, looking up topics and things. Now we go to social media and look up influencers.
Yes.
And you've got to be very careful about that because you want the tried and true.
You do. And I am not saying that you cannot glean wisdom from a mom who is just a few years down the road than you are. You can glean a lot of encouragement and maybe even some practical advice from her. I do know that it's very popular right now on social media for young mamas to be putting out there, oh, I have a 2-year-old and this is what I know about mommying. And I'm not saying that that's completely wrong. I'm just saying that if you have a 2-year-old and you're not sure how to train that 2-year-old, it probably would be best to find a mama of a 14-year-old who's doing really, really well and sit down with her and actually have a face-to-face conversation or maybe a phone conversation instead of looking her up on social media and saying, okay, what did she say? What did she post today? Looking to someone who's a little even further down the road than you.
Social media is designed to look good.
Yes.
So let me show you how amazing I am at helping my 2-year-old. Look at what I do. Look at how I do it.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is you want the tried and true. You want to be able to look at someone that over the long haul, tried and true requires amount of time.
Right.
And tried or true also needs an evidence. And so, if a person is trying to tell you how to raise a 2-year-old while they are in the process themselves of raising a 2-year-old,
right,
you can commiserate with each other. You can encourage each other. You can strengthen each other.
Yes.
But the place to get the best advice is from those who are elders. That is a Bible truth. And all you dear Christians who are listening to me, this is a Bible truth that we need to embrace in our culture, in the church. We need to embrace it heavily.
Right.
So I guess a way of saying that is find out what those are, the things that have worked.
Yes.
Find out what's worked. Find out what they are and embrace them. But you have to get counsel. You have to go to older people. You have to go to read books. Don't let social media influencers whose goal is to get 1,000 likes or 15,000 likes.
Right.
Don't let them to give so in other words, beware of the new and the unproven. No matter how good it sounds, be cautious, maybe is a better word,
right,
about the new and the unproven.
Right. And I have heard young mamas saying, well, I know that's how we've always done it. That's how my parents did it. That's how their parents did it. But we're going to try something new. And, if the new is just a rewording of how training should go, I mean, parenting books do that all the time. They take biblical truth and they just reword it in the author's tone and the way he writes.
And they deal with modern technologies or whatever.
And I understand that there are things that our children are dealing with now that we didn't have to deal with growing up. So I do understand that. But don't just discount it because, well, grandma did that, so it probably didn't work. Well, if grandma raised your dad and he is a godly man, then maybe you should talk to grandma and see what happened.
Yeah, if he's hardworking, if he's polite, if he's gracious, he treats you well.
Yes.
Then what happened there in the training is worth your learning.
Yes.
And so because there's a proven method there's something that happened that worked.
Right.
And that's all we're trying to say to you. The question is, what definite steps am I taking to train my children in the way they should go?
Right.
And so the first point we want you to know is don't discredit the tried and true. But there's a second one here I want to mention to you. Don't allow negative experiences or a negative experience to cause you to, as we would say in idiomatic expressions, don't allow a negative experience to cause you to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't allow that to happen, because sometimes in our culture, and especially in the religious world, people will say, well, I was hurt by that, or I was, that damaged me psychologically or emotionally. Unfortunately, in our culture, there are times where there is abuse and there's physical damage.
Absolutely.
But we never should allow negative experiences to cause us to bypass biblical truth. It doesn't excuse us. And if we're not careful, we have this, we just are human, this human tendency. If there's a slightly intense error on the left, then it is just so normal. How many times in our 30 years of ministry have we seen people who were damaged a little bit on the left, they will go absolutely to the extreme on the right.
Right.
And it's like shocking, like how can you go from there to there? Well, it's because the negative experience has caused them to throw out the tried and true, and they run to the extreme on the other side. And that can be true on the right, or if a person on the right is someone's really conservative and they're on the right of everything and they're harsh, or the kid feels damaged a little bit because of a harshness or some other situation or whatever, there is a huge tendency to go, see, I'm walking away from all of that. Nobody's telling me what to do. And yet people do tell you what to do. That's just the culture as well. But we tend to swing all the way to the left side of things and go to an extreme over there. When probably in this situation, middle of the road is kind of where you are there.
Right.
And it's not that it's middle of the road. It's just that there's two sides that are so extreme that when you are normal and biblical and right, you seem to be somewhere in the middle of the road.
Right. Biblical parenting is not harsh. It is not abusive. It is not psychologically or emotionally damaging to children. It is not. And I know that I have spoken with friends, with other mamas who were raised maybe in a harsh home. And so they equate the harshness that was in their home, that harsh tone that was used, maybe even there was some physical abuse if the parent was not careful about their discipline. They can equate all of that with, well, see how quote unquote spiritual my parents were, and they were in church, and that's how they trained us. And so biblical training doesn't work. Well, I don't want to be unkind to your parents at all, but that is not biblical training. So do not just say, well, if a preacher is preaching on biblical training and using verses and whatever, he's probably teaching what happened to me in my home, and so I'm not going to pay any attention to that. Please, can I appeal to you that biblical training is gentle. It is loving. It is teaching our children to want to follow God. When they learn how to obey their parents in a gentle, loving environment, then they want to obey a gentle, loving God.
Yeah. And it's also true that parenting has the gentle side to it, but it's also true that it also has the training side to it.
Absolutely.
Gentleness doesn't mean that I'm like, well, I'll just, be gentle and let everything go. No, I'm willing to be strong enough to correct. I balance gentleness with correction.
Absolutely.
And so the danger is that we can so very easily, we can just overlook. We can overlook the fact that, well, this negative experience is affecting me in how I train my child, and I'm damaging my child because I'm allowing the negative experience to keep me from training them.
Yes.
And that's what I want to say. By the way, that little phrase, baby out with the bathwater, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yes.
When I thought of that and put that in notes, I thought, that's just such a weird statement.
It's an idiom.
And I looked it up, that it actually came from a German phrase, and it, of course, means that you should not allow something important to be damaged or undone because of something else. We don't allow something important, training our children, to be damaged or to be missed or to be undone because something else happened. Now, it's not to say if there was an abuse, is that an important matter? Absolutely, it's an important matter. There are ramifications for that.
Yes.
That takes forgiveness. There's a ton of stuff that has to come into play there. But we can't allow the negative situation to prevent us from learning and growing and training and teaching and helping our children to be what they ought to be.
Absolutely.
And so just because, and that's a big one that we hear a lot. You mentioned it. That's a really big one. Well, I was raised so strict, and I don't want to be that to my kids.
Right.
And things were so inconsistent in the right-wing fundamentalism I grew up in. So I'm not going to be like that at all.
Right.
Be very wary when you make those statements, because the natural tendency is to go to the other extreme, and there will come a day that your child will resent you because all you did was exchange one extreme for another extreme. All you did was exchange one ditch for the other ditch.
Right.
And right between those two ditches is a highway. Get on the highway and train your children. Makes sense?
Absolutely.
All right. What else would you say there? Any other questions that would be good for us to evaluate or examine, or are we done with those?
I think that about covers that section or that episode.
And
of
I think that's probably a good way to start. We're a little bit short on this podcast today as far as time, not quite as long as the other ones. But let's go ahead and stop right there, because we've talked about two things so far: pitfalls to avoid and questions to help you evaluate.
Yes.
And let's just take a moment here before we sign off and encourage you parents. Moms and dads, parenting is wonderful.
It is.
What a privilege. What a opportunity to grow your children, to love your children, to train your children, to teach your children, to hug on your children, to love on your children. You that have little ones, honestly, people tell you this all the time. What's going to fly by? And really, it's not going to fly by any faster than normal time, because every year has 365 days, and every day has 24 hours. And what happens, though, is that if you're not cautious, you look back and go, I should have been busier. I should have been more alert. I should have been more aware. And just get really good at this. Just continually be training, loving, building, working, enjoying, because it does pay off. And Bethlie and I have enjoyed the payoff, haven't we?
Oh, absolutely.
What a blessing. Our older three are married. They have good marriages. We love our daughter-in-laws and our son-in-law.
Yes.
We just love them to death. And it's been such a delight to see the value of it, the paying off.
Well, and it's been a delight
works.
to watch. We have two married children that have children, and so we have little Ellie Joy, who is one, and then we have little James Russell, who is a preemie newborn, and it's just a joy to watch their parenting, the love that they have for those little ones, and how strong it is right from the very beginning, and just to watch them grow in their parenting. No one is a perfect parent. We are not perfect parents, and we know that our children aren't perfect parents either, but they're growing in their parenting, and just watching that is such a joy. And so I can't imagine anything greater, really.
Absolutely.
Than this journey of parenting.
What a blessing it is. And look, kids are kids. So you're not looking for perfect.
No.
You're looking for well-trained. And even when kids, in the midst will throw you somehow, like, I didn't see that coming, or what in the world's going on here, every situation with your children is a chance to train.
Yeah.
So you train, you love, you keep building, you train, you love, you keep building, and you'll find the blessings of God.
Yes.
Well, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us again today. When you join us next week, we will continue this thought, and we'll be talking about some goals parents ought to have, some just some very practical steps, some direction. And that's kind of where we're headed here in the coming couple of weeks. And so look forward to that, and we'll be glad to have you with us next week. Remember, you can find us online at keepingityoungpodcast.com. You can also find my itinerary, our schedule, at evangelistdaveyoung.com.
Right.
And if you'd like to support the ministry, you can also find how to do that at evangelistdaveyoung.com. There's a button at the very top of the page there on how you can do that. We would love to hear from you one way or the other. Please send us any prayer requests. Please send us any questions. If we can help you, serve you, be a blessing to you, if we can pray for you, it would be our delight to hear from you. So reach out. And remember this, always serve the Lord with gladness. I'll see you next week.
The Keeping It Young podcast is a Bax 5 Media production.